Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociology of kinship, in today's lecture we are going to discuss on the study of family in India. To begin with, let us try to understand that when we study family as an institution in India, specifically in a time when the society in India undergone large-scale transformation from post-colonial society to industrialization to the globalization, modernity and neoliberal economy, family was a subject of study by a large number of sociologists and anthropologists. So in today's lecture, by referring to Patricia O'Broy's work on the family, marriage and kinship, we are going to understand a number of things. First, we are going to understand that with the Western theory of evolution of society from a kind of a simple society to an industrial society led to the disintegration of the so-called joint family. Much of the work in the 1940s, 50s was centered around the argument that family in India was undergoing change and there was breakdown of joint family giving way to nuclear family. Now this theory was based on much of the theorization coming in from the Western society. How important or how relevant was this evolution in the Indian context is something that we will discuss. The number two is that when there was this kind of a critique of the evolutionary approach of the study of family, we tried to replace household to understand the changes taking place. So household was seen as a co-residential unit and family as a genealogical construct. So the shift was to understand changes that was taking place in the family with reference to the size and composition. Patricia O'Broy finds problematic in both the approach and therefore kind of suggests certain way forwards by which it is important to understand not only the quantitative understanding of family in terms of size and composition, but also to understand certain kind of qualitative dimension like the quality of life, the relationship, and therefore she suggests to refine the structural functional approach in sociology that highlighted some of the functions of family specifically in the Indian society. So with this objective in mind, let us understand how the discourses and debates around the study of family in India has undergone changes. So Patricia O'Broy, by doing a review of the writings in the field of Indian family and kinship studies, argue that it is not well integrated. She points out at three problems. Number one, the subject is partitioned between several different social science disciplines: Indology, law, anthropology, psychology, economy, and demography. Now, each of these disciplines tries to focus on one particular aspect of the institution and not takes it in an integrated manner. The difference between sociology and anthropology as a discipline is based on the metropolitan divide between anthropology of kinship and sociology of family. So those who were supporting that these are two different disciplines were in favor of trying to argue that anthropology as a discipline studied kinship, marriage, whereas sociology as a discipline focused more on family. Now, most of this dichotomy or binary was coming in from the idea that kinship as a system of social relation was found or dominant in a traditional society, whereas family was a reflection of the modern industrial society. Now, what kind of family was kind of mapped with industry was the nuclear or the conjugal family. Now, how did this argument come in terms of creating this two map? We will get through when we look into a number of sociological study on the family in India. The second problem identified by Professor Patricia O'Broy was that a large amount of data, quantifiable data, has been collected by various government organizations, especially for the census and survey. However, these data have not been incorporated in the studies by social scientists. They are just a reflection of, say, increase in the number of elementary family or nuclear family, or there is a kind of focus on the size of the family, how many members are residing, or whether it is a single-headed household, a man or a female-headed household. integrated sociological analysis is something which is missing. The third problem in the study of Indian family is that the sociology of family has focused more on kinship norms rather than on deviance, pathology and breakdown. As a result, it has failed to inform practical challenges and are therefore left out of policy intervention. So when we kind of review the studies on in family in India, the idea was whether it was a patrilineal society, whether it was a co-property owning group, or whether there was a kind of a common kitchen. What was missing out was the whole idea that there was importance to critique the institution as a family coming in, and therefore kind of also provide policy inputs in terms of suggesting changes or certain measures for transformation of the family. Patricia Oberoi examines these problems of disciplinary boundaries by reviewing the debates around the question. And the most important or the most critical question whenever we kind of try to make a sense of change in the family in India is to understand or have an answer to the question whether the nuclear family has replaced joint family in India. The question can be put out in a different way, whether joint family has disintegrated and has given way to the nuclear family. Now, this debate between joint versus nuclear family was something which was most of the sociologists were occupied with, and much of the social scientists were divided on the issue of future of traditional joint family, or in other words, whether the joint family was breaking down because of the impact of modernization. Now, why was this discourse coming in the social sciences was to put into the institution of family in the evolutionary paradigm and look into how, because the society was moving from an agrarian rural base to an industrial urban based society, it would have a repercussion on the family as an institution, where the family in the rural area was identified as joint and the one in the industrial was identified as nuclear or conjugal, and therefore there was a clear-cut shift from joint family to nuclear family. One of the response was the difference in size and composition of the family and household. So much of the argument would say that the whole idea of understanding joint or jointness of the Indian family was to look into the size and composition, where earlier the number was more and members from extended kin groups were a part of it. So what Patricia Oberoi wants makes an effort is to recover the family as an integrated object of study by reclaiming what has been sidelined by anthropologists and sociologists on questions of household types and composition. So this comes in time that if we were not able to understand or have a clarity in terms of what is a joint family, how we define a joint family, a better option would be to understand the size and composition by making a distinction between household and family. So when we look into family in India, we know that it is kind of not only in terms of numbers, or it's not only in terms of the composition. We also have a kind of a emotional attachment, a kind of an imagination of family in India. And this self-imagination of an institution represents the uniqueness of Indian culture and tradition. Therefore, it is kind of very different to differentiate from value, behavior and norms. What was theoretically argued was in terms of breakdown of the jointness was not to be seen in the empirical or ethnographic study of the family, where it was a kind of considered an institution which individual attached a lot of emotion, and the depiction of India as a society mainly by, say, Western scholar was in terms of romanticize this institution of jointness and family, and therefore kind of describe India as a collective unit compared to the West, which was considered as an individualistic society. So this value of a joint family or familism, that is the whole idea of focus on the family as a collective group, was against individualism, which was something which was marked in the Western society with the coming in of modernity and kind of growth, large-scale growth of industries and urban center. There was a shift from collective to the individual. Now this again, there's a binary mapping between India in the East as being a collective society and the East being a individualistic society. Now when the theory of transsocial change was applied to the study of India, this same model was applied, that India was moving from a collective society to an individualistic society, and within this framework then joint family was seen as disintegrated, and therefore in the Indian, the debates or discourses from within India was in terms of consider family as a sacred institution which was being transformed because of the influence of the Western ideas. So there was a kind of a protective ideology which was trying to kind of focus more in terms of avoiding the external influence and keep the joint family as intact. So when we look into the history of joint family, how does it come into the discourse of social sciences, we see that the concept of joint family was the product of British colonial administration engaged with the system of kinship and marriage for making law regulating property and revenue. So which was basically whole idea kind of it was an administrative concept which was kind of used by the British administrators in order to extract exact data for purpose of administration. Now this concept, administrative idea of the joint family was further legitimized by the Indological approach. So in order to understand the principles of Indian legal system, the Britishers, they referred to the Dharma Shastra for the Hindu family, Shariat for the Muslim family, and the Indologists, they confirmed the ideas articulated by the British administrator that the joint family as typical and traditional form of family organization in India. Now this is colonial period where the data was suggesting that there was a persistence of the phenomena of joint family. Now Henry Sumner Maine played an important role in shaping the Indological approach to families. A number of Western scholars further legitimized this idea of the joint family as the typical type of family found in India. Now, if we look into the work of Henry Sumner Maine, we see that he relied on the classical textual sources of Hindu law as well as existing ethnographic and administrative law records. Henry Maine projected the joint family as the living example of the earliest form of human organization. So, he called the traditional joint family as patriarchal because it was constituted by a group of men tracing descent in male line, and the absolute power lied in the hand of the senior most male member, which is referred as the patria potestas, that is the power of the senior most male member. Now this depiction of the Hindu family as a patriarchal family was kind of an ideal type which was to be articulated in most of the works on India. And here the family was depicted as functioning as a corporation, and it existed in perpetuity, that is members are born and they exit through death, but the male members kind of line of the male members continues, and they are co-partners in a joint estate. That is, every male member by virtue of birth has the right in the joint property of the family. This is also referred as the undivided Hindu family, and it kind of is, the description is such that this undivided family expanded over several generations to become an organized, self-regulating brotherhood of relatives, the village community. So basically in one particular village or in a region, because it expanded to 8 generations, much of the members were related through the male line and they were interdependent on each other. So the village was also described in the works of the Western scholar as self-sufficient unit, as self-regulating unit. So this understanding was coming in from the depiction of Hindu family as an undivided patrilineal family. Henry Maine considered village to be the characteristic of South Asian social organization based on principle of status and would evolve to that of contract. Now again we have this within this idea of the evolutionary theory that society was changing from simple society to a complex society. There was a change from collective to individual. The other level of change was from status to contract. Now status was something which was ascribed by virtue of birth, that you are a member of a patriarchal family, you are a member of a co-parsonary group. There is a shift from the institution of family and kinship to formal economic organization and market, contractual relations becomes important, and these are based on the virtue of achievement and individual merit. So this transformation which was taking place was also kind of making a reflection in the joint family, where the idea of a jointness was being replaced by monogamous conjugal families. So earlier you had marriages being negotiated between two kin group as strengthening kin relation. So in anthropology we have the alliance approach where Levi-Strauss, which would kind of argue about strengthening group relations through marriages. Now as the transition takes place from a rural agrarian simple society to industrial urban society, marriage changes and becomes an individual conjugal choice between two individuals, and this kind of gets reflected in individual ownership of property. So we no longer have joint property, there is this emergence of the private properties, and also the idea of power of testation, that is the individual have the will to dispose property as per the wish. So these transformation was also changing the nature of the family. So the early generation sociologist identified family of the patriarchal joint family of Sanskrit legal and sacerdotal text as the traditional form of the family. So much of the description of family was coming in from the religious text, especially the description of an Hindu undivided family as a co-owning property group, and religious collectivity was coming from how it was described in the Sanskritic text. So under the influence of cultural nationalism, they regarded the family as a unifying civilizational idea. Now when there was a kind of the coming in of the nationalism, of the sense of India as a nation, and there was kind of a critique of too much of influence of the West, the family became an unifying and an identity by which India could reclaim its traditional and civilizational status. So we basically look into the binaries which have been used by the evolutionary theory to explain the emergence of nuclear family from a joint family. We see that there is a correlation. They are kind of dual or a binary mapping, which ultimately comes at the describing how joint family has been replaced by nuclear family. So in the East we had this idea of a collective society, whereas in the West we had individualism. In the East, the family was seen as a co-partner, that is the ownership of collective property. In the West, it was private property, and it was kind of individual who were the owners of this property. The level of status to contract, from kinship relation, that is group marriages, alliances, to monogamous conjugal relation, and ultimately from a joint family to a nuclear family. So when we look into these idea of how there was an arrival of this understanding of whether the joint family was breaking down to nuclear, we need to review a number of sociologists who have studied the institution of family. So the first we look into is the work of Iravati Karve. Now Iravati Karve tried to reconcile the unitary Sanskrit heritage with the empirical variety of contemporary Indian family and kinship. Now, what Iravati Karve was trying to do was making an effort to create a map, a geographical map, which would reflect the kinship practices, and the difference would be in terms of the vocabulary, the language of the community in terms of kinship terms or kinship terminology that was being used by them. And she identified 4 types of kinship organization in India. Now, this division into 4 map was also kind of is geographical and regional, and it could also be based on the use of a particular language. So, the first is Indo-Sanskritic type in the north, the second is Dravidian type in the south, third is mixed central zone, and fourth is a geographically non-contiguous Austro-Asiatic type. And when we read Iravati's work, The Kinship Organization in India, we see that she goes into a detailed description of marriage, kinship, and the institution of family in each of these 4 zones. So, counterbalancing the heterogeneity, Karve proposed 3 unifying factors through the subcontinent. Number 1, All India Institution of Caste. So, these are some of the features that would be found in all the 4 zones, despite the difference in the variation in the terms of practice of kinship and marriage. So, the first is All Institution of Caste, the second is the patrilineal or matrilineal joint family, and joint family, according to Karve, was people who lived under the same roof, ate the food cooked from the same hearth or the same kitchen, and had a common property. So, these 3 or 4 ideas were central by the sociologists and anthropologists of this time to define a jointness, that is the roof, the kitchen, property, and most important for genealogical connection. The third unifying feature that Iravati Karve points out is Sanskritic heritage that provides description of all kinship practices found throughout the continent. So, in this you have kind of significance to how kinship and marriages are reflection of the particular culture and tradition of a community. Now, after looking into Iravati Karve, the other idea which also kind of plays important in understanding the debate between the joint and the nuclear family is the modernization thesis. Now, when we looked into the British period, we realized that the British censors, they articulated the theory of the breakdown of the traditional joint family. This idea was further strengthened by sociologists trained in the Indological approach. Post-World War II, the idea was further legitimized by modernization theorists who identified the Anglo-American nuclear family or the conjugal family as best adapted to the requirement of modern industrial society. So, there is a kind of historicity to the legitimization of the idea that joint family was disintegrating to a nuclear family. So, the modernization theory articulated the idea that there was a change in the economic, the society was moving from a market-based society to an industrial society, and family which was could best adapt to the industrial society was the nuclear or the conjugal theory. Now, this modernization theory is best understood by looking into the theory of family given by Talcott Parson. Talcott Parson was provided the theory of family by putting in his functional approach, where he looked into the family as central to the primary responsibility of socialization, and basically he was looking at America where the post-World War crisis, that is rising divorce, declining birth rate, and increased mortality rate. He argued that these factors led to the emergence of a nuclear family in America, and he was kind of indicative that there was kind of a lot of stresses and changes which was taking place, and according to Parson, American society was witnessing culmination of a long-term process of isolation, differentiation and specialization. So as an occupational structure develops, that is industry develops, and these industry and the market, they observe the function of the society. So initially it was the kinship group which was performing this function. Now the market becomes prominent, and therefore the functional role of the family is reduced. So the family was reduced to its minimum structural and functional essential as a special type of group. And according to Parson, they are kind of based on sexual division and gender. So you have the axis of generation, that is the father mother, which is based on power, and then you have the instrumental expressive function, which is the male child and the female child. So when we look into the whole idea of how the debates were growing up, it helps us to understand that there was a certain kind of background to which was used by sociologists in India, coming in from the Western model, to understand the idea of change or transformation in the family from a joint family to a nuclear family. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.